And welcome everyone to this Rafael Film Center question and answer session for 1,000 Pieces of Gold. My name is Joanne Parsont. I'm the Director of Education for the California Film Institute, and it is my great pleasure to welcome our amazing guests, filmmakers Nancy Kelly and Kenji Yamamoto, and the lovely Rosalind Chao.
Yay!
Thank you so much for taking the time out of, I'm sure, your very busy schedules to speak with us tonight. One of the bonuses of this situation is that at least we can find you at home when we need you. So I thank you for taking your time out of, on a Sunday to do this question and answer session with us. I also want to, just a couple of other thanks. I want to thank Kino Lorber and Kino Marquis for making the film available to our CFI audience. We were so thrilled we were able to do this and to make it available this weekend for people to watch. I also want to send a huge thanks out to our CFI staff, and in particular, the two wizards behind the curtain, CFI Operations Manager Dave Ferris and Rafael General Manager Dan Zastro, for making this Q&A happen. This is our first live stream Q&A brought to you exclusively by Rafael at home. So thanks to everyone for making that happen. So please feel free, if you have any thoughts or comments you want to share, please feel free to use the chat function that's at the bottom of your screen. If you do have a question you want to ask our guests, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and then I will be able to take questions from there to ask of our guests. I'm of course going to lead off with a few questions of my own, of which I have many, but I'll try and keep it limited so that we can get a few from our audience as well. I know we have about 200 people that had registered, and hoping that we're able to share this conversation with people everywhere. So for you guys, it has been 30 years since the three of you have come together to talk about this film, or probably really for anything for that matter. How does this reunion feel in this context now?
Well, it's wonderful to see Roz, and sort of virtually in the flesh.
When I had my first baby, Nancy knit a sweater for me, which I've saved.
My mother knit the sweater.
Oh, I had always thought it was you.
No, I cannot knit. I'm a disgrace to the family.
Certainly wasn't me.
It wasn't. Right.
I did get a little teary-eyed when I saw them again the first time.
Didn't you see that I was wiping tears from my eyes when when you appeared on them?
It's really great to come together like this.
So can you, Nancy or Kenji, tell us a little bit about how the 4K restoration came to be that even got us to this place 30 years later, that we were able to bring the film back into the world?
The film, we shot it in 35 millimeter. We had 35 millimeter prints. And for the last, I don't know how many years, they're so old, they wouldn't go through the projector. So we couldn't project the film. The video looked horrible. We made, like the technology when we made the film to tape transfer was awful. So it just felt like the film was lost. And I know Sandra Schulberg from so many different things. She worked on the international distribution of 1,000 Pieces of Gold, and we're members of New Day Films together. And she just, when she started Indie Collect, she was just like, 1,000 Pieces of Gold, you have to do it. And they had figured out a way to do what's an extremely expensive procedure, much less expensively, like for a fraction of the cost. And we had the negative in Kenji's mother's closet or something.
And at 96 years old, it was time to figure out what to do with this negative.
Well, she wasn't, the film wasn't 96.
No, my mother and father were 95 and 96. So, the clock was ticking, as it were. So we really wanted to restore it. We raised a little bit of money. We took some of our savings. We campaigned for its restoration, and we pulled together just enough money to actually get the film restored. And it took us a while to get to that point. And there was a lot of back and forth working with Indie Collect. And once we received the scan, we had the drives shipped to San Francisco, and our colorist, Gary Coates, worked on the film, and here it is. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching our film, for those who've seen it.
We had a glorious time when they do that scanning thing. none of the color adjustment happens. You have to go back and redo all of that. It was so much fun because you could do so much more now.
Right, right. Well, so what was that experience of revisiting a film that you had made 30 years ago? Like, did you feel like you wished you could have actually changed other things while you were doing that?
You know, I had to just say, you can't redirect this, you know, and there were some really rewarding things like, Rosalind, remember the scene where you walk through the saloon and in the dark with the knife?
Yes.
And then you find Jim playing cards. That was always the scene that the directors of photography that I interviewed, they were all just like, you can't do that scene on that budget. And it was because they thought that the whole saloon would have to be lit. But Bobby was just like, you know, what do you want to see? I was like, you know, Lalou with the lantern and she finds the knife. That's all. And he was like, oh, I can do that.
He was wonderful.
He was wonderful. But there were things that were in that negative that we never saw until this process. Anyway, I'm talking too much about the restoration. Sorry.
Well, so Rosalind, tell me, you know, had you actually revisited this film, you know, since that sort of, you know, was from an early time in your career before this restoration happened? And how does it feel to revisit it now? Like, what kind of memories does it bring up?
I mean, to be honest, I actually haven't. I can't look at myself. But I did see I saw the previews that, you know, Laura Burr had done, and it did, a flood of memories came back, and I'd forgotten. It's beautiful, beautiful movie. I mean, it's just luscious. And I mean, it's amazing what they were able to do with that budget. You know that Nancy and Kenji drove the camera out on the phone. Am I right? I mean, it was really,
Yes, we did.
it was a labor of love for everyone, but they really delivered the baby.
Can you speak a little bit about that to, you know, Nancy, at the time, you know, this is the late 80s, female feature filmmakers were sadly pretty rare. Not that they're not still, but they were very rare in the 80s. Not to mention, you know, a feature film with a female Asian American protagonist. We didn't get any of those either. You know, so with this being your first feature, how did you even get the film finance? How did you get this amazing cast?
Do you remember Tell Me a Riddle that was co-produced by Rachel Lyon? It was a San Francisco-based production company, Godmother Productions.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew Rachel somehow, and she said to me, if you want to direct this movie, you have to raise the money yourself because no producer will ever let you be the director. And that's how Kenji and I ended up raising money, because it was the only way that I could. And even when the time came to sign the contracts, as the director, I said, I'm not going to sign that. It says the producer has final say or something. And our lawyer was like, you are one of the producers. It's going to be fun. You know, but I mean, that's what we had to do. That's right. We had to do it that way. So, but man, I don't even know how much I knew about I don't know. I just felt like I was doing exactly what I was put on this earth to do.
It's true that, you know, in the spirit of independent film, you truly have to raise the money for the film and be in control of everything. And, you know, part of my role in the project was to protect the script and to protect the director. And oftentimes in a meeting, you know, people would look to me and I would know instinctively that this was not going to be a very good partnership. And when we hired, you know, like Bobby Bukowski, he looked directly into Nancy's eyes and said, so how do you see this? We knew then that, you know, this was going to be a great partnership. So it really is the root of the entire process is who's paying attention to the female director, the creator.
Right.
So that was really imperative to protect that.
And how challenging was it though? Sorry, go ahead, Rosalind.
I'm going to say one thing, and also Nancy's quite modest. What she didn't actually say is that prior to production, I feel like Nancy prepared me. Oh my God, I keep getting tipped. She prepared me I mean, I was pretty inexperienced. I mean, I hadn't done a film like this before, and Nancy sent me books. I remember you sent me The Spirit of Survivor by Gail Sheehy, which was
Right.
so. Do you remember?
Yep.
I thought
Yep.
that was. I think back on that. That was such a piece of. You know, it was just wonderful directing. Before I even got there, I felt very. You know, I felt like she had really helped me to do the homework and to, you know, learn how to prepare for a role like that.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
That's great. Yeah.
Was it rare for, I'm curious what drew you to the role, Rosalind, and I mean, how rare was it to see a film at that time that did, where, you know, the protagonist was an Asian American woman that could carry the whole film, and that they were letting that get made, and what an amazing role it was. Like, did it feel like that was like a once in a lifetime opportunity at that time?
To be honest, I was too young and not smart to realize that it was. I mean, yes, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity at that time, but I don't know if I really got it the way I do now when I realize what a challenge that must have been for them to get that made. I mean, that would be hard to get made now even.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
True.
in that vein of sort of then and now, you know, even though the film takes place almost a century and a half ago, it's hard not to see the parallels between, you know, the racism and persecution of Chinese immigrants in the film and the anti-Asian rhetoric we're hearing now in response to the coronavirus, you know, the Chinese virus. It suddenly feels like the perfect film for our time. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about kind of that, of how it's, you know, 30 years later, it feels like it's just as prescient as ever.
Wow, who would have
Those are
thought?
me.
Go, Rosalind. Say something.
Well, I mean, I had an experience the day that there was a press conference where they started calling it the Chinese virus, and I was at an outdoor market standing, you know, next to my husband, and there were other couples standing further apart, and some man came over and pointed at me, and it was a very, you know, it was very Thousand Pieces of Gold. He points at me and says, "Stay 6 feet away from him." And I looked around and I realized he was talking to me and pointing at me and wanting me to stand 6 feet away from my husband, who's white. So, you know, there was that lack of understanding that, you know, Asian woman could be with a white guy and I should be 6 feet away from him. And it was definitely racist in tone. So, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It is really remarkable and sad that so little has changed in that that whole situation. You know, the sexual trafficking of Lalu and the racism and you know, the sense of a woman as property. All those things can still have big time conversations about them.
So I'm curious, when you first read the book, Nancy, and knew that it was something that you did want to turn into a film, what was it really that drew you most about that story of, you know, of all stories?
It was the sense of Lalu becoming her own person. You know, and from the moment that I read the novel for the first time, I knew where it would start and where it would end, because there was just a part of her life that was, you know, from being sold to being able to decide what was home for herself. That, I mean, that was what it was for me. But then, and when I brought the novel home to Kenji, he had
Yes.
other interests.
I felt that, you know, it was a perfect dynamic of being the other. What it's like to be not only Asian, but also Charlie, who was a Yankee in a town where a lot of the miners were from the South, let's say. And he stood out as a citizen that didn't belong there. And so that, to me, was a very sort of subtle way of messaging to a viewing audience, more than what it is to be Asian American in an American company or an immigrant in this country, but what does it feel like to be on the outside looking in? And so I thought it was a very profound story in that way. That's what really made me want to make this film and try to raise the money.
It's interesting in many ways. It's very much a Western feeling story, and and that's a period and a period piece. Like that's not an easy thing to take on as your first feature. Taking on that period and the riding of the horses, like all of those things that are just there's some learning curves there.
I didn't think I had only, I don't know, a few years before we made 1,000 Pieces of Gold, I was making my living as a ranch hand. So I wasn't worried about the animals, but Rosalind had to, they weren't movie horses. They spooked whenever the boom mic went over their heads. I mean.
It was a lot for her to take. But I had seen your documentary about horses, about the ranch. And so I knew that you were comfortable with that. And so that was definitely comforting. But they put us on horses and we trained for not a long period of time because we didn't have that budget. But yeah, I can remember at one point stand on the top of a cliff. I don't know. I think that shot's still in the movie. And you guys had me get on the horse and I was like, where's the saddle? And no saddle, those days, there were no saddles in Mongolia at that time, or I can't remember if that scene. So I got on the horse bareback. Do you remember this?
No.
I was on a cliff and there was only one other person that, I guess the horse trainer standing near me, and I climbed on and he reared up and I fell off.
No.
Young bones. And I still remember your faces. You all were just frozen and nobody moved. Everybody was horrified. You were so relieved once I started talking again. But yeah.
God. Well, do you remember when the ox ran away with all of you in the cart? Just like across the mountains, across the plains, they were all bumpy but you guys didn't even act scared. You just sat there. One of the wranglers had to go like chasing after you and stop the ox.
It was on us. Act. I seem to remember.
So yeah, the animals. I didn't know any better either. Like I didn't know that there were really the difference between regular horses and movie horses. I just didn't worry about.
You're probably better off.
I was probably better off.
There are a lot of things on the set that I didn't tell you actually.
Protecting the director.
Right.
You were saying how you were protecting the female filmmaker. That's definitely the part of protecting the director from things like that.
Well, the one thing that we, finding the location was in itself a task. And, we had budgeted to actually take an existing bustling town like Auburn and fill the streets with dirt, take all the parking meters out and take all the signage out and distress all the buildings. And it would have cost half the budget easily. So
there wouldn't have been saddles for anybody.
Right. You are very lucky. So, and in choosing the crew, working with Sarah Green, our co-producer, one of the things that I remember what we did is that we presented the screenplay, and it was imperative that they really love the screenplay. If they had any doubts about this, oh, you can't do this, this is impossible, if there were any feedback like that, we were less interested in hiring that person. They had to come to it with the same enthusiasm that we had, and to basically dress up the set and our actors and the location with the horses and make it happen. So that was a wonderful kind of spirit that we had on the set. One thing that we did was that even the art department said, so there's this ship, we should build this ship. And they did in Montana on location. And they were so clever that they had the ship rock like this, except all the lights were starting to fall off. They didn't secure the lights. So they said, well, we're not going to do that. So it really was a spirit that was really shared by everyone on the crew.
And Rosalind, do
But
you?
You did find a real mining town, right? It was an actual mining town. So it had this smell of, I mean, everything sensorially helped the actors. It felt very real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the best ever. I mean, you know, everybody was, you know, just game. And it was,
Yeah.
Sarah, she brought really good people together. She found really good people,
Mm-hmm.
and they were. I mean, that was a hardship, I think, except that she made it fun for everybody.
Yeah.
I just
She did.
Oh, there was something I was going to ask you, Rosalind, and I forgot.
I want to turn it to a couple. You will keep that. I'm sure it'll come back to you.
Okay.
To a couple of questions from some of our audience members, specifically asking where the movie was filmed, where the town was.
That's
Well, the town was in Montana. It was in Montana, and
oh,
oh
we
yes,
can't. There's a poll that just showed up. Okay, it's not.
and it's called Bovey Restorations. There was a congressman in Montana many years ago, Mr. Bovey, who found this little town, and he wanted to. He revered historical things, so he would purchase other buildings in the state of Montana that were genuinely 1880s gold rush period buildings, structures, and he would take them apart, number them, and put them into this little town that he created as a kind of like a Western Disneyland, and put these structures together. And I read about it in Sunset Magazine, this magazine I was reading, and said, oh my God, we have to try to rent this place. And fortunately, it was used as a set from before, Little Big Man, which starred Dustin Hoffman. Arthur Penn was the director. And at that time, I don't know, it was in the late 60s or 70s, they had buried all the telephone lines, so it was perfect. And so when we called the restoration place, there were two. It was population 2, the curator and his mother, and so we struck a deal to lease the grounds for 3 months, and we spent 2 months building sets. So it was we actually got into some of the buildings, and some of them were dilapidated. So our art department reconstructed the floor. And to economize on how to shoot the film quickly, we had what were called flyaway walls. Therefore, in the saloon scene, we can pull the walls apart and then it'll be a bedroom or some other kind of room. So we were able to do that. And the entire production was on the set itself. So I can look outside my production window or as I was editing and see what was going on. And sometimes the accountant would tap me on the shoulder and I would be called out and say, you know what, Nancy, we're running a little late. I think we have to cut a scene.
I don't remember it that way. I remember that remember we just have all these pages we were supposed to shoot in a day and we never shot all of them. So then I'd be standing there saying, well, what are we going to cut out? And then Kenji would come and help to decide what the film could survive without. But it seems like we did that every day.
Right.
Remember, there were times where it would suddenly start snowing. You'd be in the middle of a shot, and Bobby would run up and say, okay, change costumes. We're going to run outside and shoot the scene where you're coming with the thing. And I'd have no clue what he's talking about, but we'd just run get changed and, you know, run out in the snow when it, because the weather would change every 20 minutes sometimes, it felt like.
Right.
It was really, it was a great experience, I have to say. It was a great
Well, yes, we were told that Montana had a saying that the two seasons in Montana, winter and bad roads. So I only learned that later.
But there was a whole winter scene, as you see in the film, but we could afford like artificial snow. Like Kenji always jokes that what we could afford was to see Lalu's foot go into one little pile of snow, because that's all we could afford. It was a close-up of her foot in snow. And then there was this one day when we woke up and remember it was just snowing, and it was warm, so it didn't seem like it would last that long. But all those scenes where you see Lalu walking through the town in the snow, that was just $30,000 of snow that just fell. And you and Bobby and I jumped in some vehicle, went roaring off to the set so that we could film you doing those things, because we just didn't know how long it was going to last.
That too. I think we stopped just in time, if I
Yes,
remember
we
correctly.
did.
Yeah,
The sun came out.
yeah. But also there were so many times when we were doing like wide shot, medium shot, close up of you and Chris, and wide shot would be sunny, medium shot it would be cloudy, close up it would be snowing, you know. And Kenji would say, "That's all right, we'll fix it, just keep going."
Just keep going.
A couple more questions from audience members. I want to see if we can get a few more in, because I know we could talk all night. One audience member says, "This is still such a beautiful film about a woman's quest for autonomy and freedom, and it ages well." Wondering if there are aspects of the story that you would make differently if you were telling the same story today.
You know, Rosalind said she doesn't watch herself, and I don't like to remake the film. It's just enough to drive a person crazy. I just don't think of it in those terms, you know. I'm nutty enough now.
Another question is, how close to reality was the film? Was the marriage between Charlie and Polly in real life a marriage of convenience or a true love story?
They actually did marry. We condensed time. I think it took 20 years for them to actually marry. They kept a close relationship, but they did marry later. And let's see, I think Charlie was a drunk.
Oh, really?
And
And they're buried across, one is on one side of the Salmon River and the other one is on the other side, am I right? Because yeah, the two towns, I think one wanted to lay claim to Charlie, and that's how they resolved it, is one was on one side of the river and the other one was on.
Huh.
And there's a museum dedicated to them as well.
Yes, and they I mean, their homestead on the River of No Return is legendary. I mean, we've had river runners come to screenings and tell us about stopping there when Lalu was still alive, and how now when you stop there, there's a little some sort of rock with a story on it about the film. And I mean, I don't think it was a marriage of convenience. I like to think it was a love story, because in real life, it lasted so long.
yes, and I actually visited the location when we were considering locations. It is so remote. It took, and I went to visit it when it was still snow, and it took 20 miles of riding a snowmobile to get to this place from the nearest road. It would have been impossible for a crew to actually shoot there. But I had to see it, of course. And the character of Jim was created in the novel, and we also took that character and extended him in this film as well. So that's a created character. There was no mule packer who brought Lalu over.
But he was a great character.
Yes, and sort of an important one.
Yeah, yeah.
Another question, a story-related question for Roz. the question from the audience member is, she says, as a young woman watching the scene when Jim left Lalu was incredibly frustrating because he never gave her a chance to explain herself. How did it feel for you filming that scene as a young woman? And what did you think about it?
About him never, I felt like because he never explained himself.
No, because Lalu didn't get the chance to explain herself. He never gave her a chance to explain herself.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that was a product of that time that, you know, women didn't really get to express. I mean, I feel like she was a product at that time as well. You know, she was a girl that came from a rural family in which, you know, the father, it was very patriarchal environment. Might have been patriotic as well. Yeah, it was meant to be frustrating, I think.
Right, right.
Mhm.
So another question. Well, first there's one, yes, that was just, there's a former editing intern of yours named Teresa Francis who wants to say hello to Kenji and Nancy.
Hi. Oh, my
Wow.
Lord.
Coming out of the woodwork. Another question, did the film open up more opportunities for you, Nancy, as a filmmaker?
Oh, you know, there was nothing more that I wanted to do after we made Thousand Pieces of Gold than direct more drama. I just felt like I never went to film school, but I just felt this is where my instincts are. And we developed, I don't know, in the 90s, probably 4 different scripts.
Mhm.
And I just couldn't get another film made. And I finally just got so frustrated by the end of the 90s that I went back to making documentaries, because at least I could get them made, right? You shoot a little bit and you tell more of the story, and you raise some money, you shoot some more. And, but, you know, this restoration and starting to show it, you know, when we could still leave our houses, we were showing it in theaters. And I just, you know, I'm working on another script now. I just feel like, all right, I'm just not gonna, because I mean, there's a whole bunch of women like me that, you know, directed one narrative film and never got another one made. And it's not just me. This is what I've learned during this restoration. I always thought, well, I made a mistake somehow with Thousand Pieces of Gold, but there's just, you know, there have been studies, and, you know, we're just not going to take it anymore. So
That was the product of that era in particular. Am I right? I mean, if that film had been made now, don't you think you might have had more opportunities?
You know, Sandra Schulberg, the executive director of Indie Collect, sometimes she just looks at me and says, you know, this film would have, it would have done so much better in this world, because like Kino Lorber, when we met with them the first time, they literally had a list of 5 marketing strengths of Thousand Pieces of Gold. Women's story, woman director,
Woman in the lead.
Asian American lead. What was story of immigration? You know, I mean, I just wanted to kiss that guy, because nobody said the first time around. Nobody had words for that kind. All
Right.
those qualities of the film that were part of its very nature. Nobody saw it that way. It was just like, what are we going to do with this? You know? So
that does bring, someone else is asking if you could talk a little about what you're working on now.
When We Were Cowgirls, it's called. And it's the story of this friendship between these 2 women it's like a twinship, you know, one's got something that the other one desperately needs, and the other one, you know, they just one follows the other one from New England to a cattle ranch in Nevada, and they become cowgirls. It's loosely based on my story of becoming a cowgirl. And it's about the strain that it puts on their friendship and whether it will survive being the fish out of water that they are in this harsh environment. So,
And
yeah.
rest assured, it'll take a producer who loves the story, who will hire a crew that love the story and will want to jump on board this project, and that's what it takes. I don't think that's going to change, actually. I don't think there's a ready set team of financiers lined up to make this film. It'll be a push. I'm certain of that.
What stage are you at with it now? You're still in pre-production? Is this
Pre-production. Yeah, pre-production.
with that?
I got to go work on the script. Well, I've been working really hard on the script.
So another question for you, Nancy. What inspired you to be a filmmaker? Is there a filmmaker who inspired you?
Oh, before I ever thought that there was any world in which I would be a filmmaker, I was a huge fan of Robert Altman and Francois Truffaut and Agnes Varda. There was a little independent cinema, the Pleasant Street Cinema in Northampton, Massachusetts, where I went all the time, usually by myself because I didn't know anybody else that would go to those movies. But but I didn't have any idea. I was a public health education specialist. I didn't have any idea that there was a place for me in an artistic world, but I made 5 health education films, little dramas, and the first day that I walked on the set, it was like, oh, what's this? But when I told my mother, after I really got it figured out, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do, I told my mother, and she said, if you die, we won't be able to afford to bury you.
Oh,
So
there's one other question, actually from someone that used to work at the Film Institute, that said the film really holds up well and is still such an inspiring story of a woman empowered. She says, I heard Rosalind's family owned a pancake restaurant. Is that true?
we did.
Did that inform the scene where Lalo was serving pancakes at the boarding house?
Well, we were just talking about that. No, I was a waitress and a busboy, dishwasher. So no, I didn't even know how to crack an egg when we started. I mean, I was a pup out of the house. I didn't not know how to cook. I think, Nancy, you showed me how to crack 2 eggs at once. Am I right?
no. The first time I ever cracked an egg, it went outside the bowl instead of in. No, that wasn't me.
Yeah, I did not. I handed me the eggs and I was like, oh God. I don't know why you didn't fire me within the first day.
Are you kidding? Are you kidding? After your audition, there have never been a way. Never. We were so hooked from your audition.
I don't know if you know this, but you were, I think, the second person we auditioned, and we were so awestruck.
Oh, that's lovely.
But we decided we can't be this lucky. This never happens. So we saw maybe another 50 more actresses, and no one ever came up to your bar. And it was like, ever.
No.
And we said, no, it's not as good as Roz.
Right.
That was how we always.
3 continents.
Yes.
You know, Laura Kennedy cast it, right? And
Yep.
Yes.
I think she casting at Warner Brothers, or
Yeah.
but
Right.
she see this teeny tiny tiny play I did, and that's how I ended up reading for you
Wow,
guys.
really? Huh. Yeah. And do you remember that you came in and you were prepared to do the audition in Mandarin? You would learn from your mother. Do you remember this?
Oh.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You
Yes.
had learned that scene. And we were all just like, oh no, that's okay. And Laura especially was like looking at me like, how am I going to do this? But you persuaded us in the sweetest way, And it was just, we just said to Laura, when she stops talking, you start talking. And that's how that audition went.
I don't remember that, but that's very funny.
Oh yeah, that was unforgettable. Unforgettable.
Back then, even. I still am, but.
Rosalind, another question for you. Can you talk about what the process was getting into the character of Lalu for you?
Yeah, well, like I said, I felt that, you know, I wasn't as experienced as I would have liked to have been, to be honest. I mean, you always wish that now you could play the roles that you did back then. But Nancy really did help me with preparation a lot, you know, by sending me so much research. And we talked a lot about the character and about what she'd hoped to see. And, you know, I felt she was really helpful. Also being there was, my dressing room was a saloon. I think it was like one of the bedrooms in the saloon.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the whole environment was very conducive to being Lalu. And she was a dichotomy too, because she wasn't all one thing. She wasn't what you expected her to be.
Right.
I'm not articulate, so, but Nancy was definitely very helpful. Really did do my homework, and we did it together.
Mm-hmm.
And Anne Makepeace really, she wrote a very good script. You know, I mean, I went back to revisit that for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think in preparation for the commentary that's coming with the Blu-ray, and so I was really struck by how well she wrote that script.
Can you tell? So that was Anne Makepeace, correct?
Anne Makepeace. Yep.
So, who is a fellow filmmaker, and you guys met at a writing workshop? Is that?
We met when at the food table at a film festival where both of our first films won awards, and then the next time we saw each other was at the Squaw Valley Community of Writers, where we were both there with.
Did it take her to adapt that screenplay?
Pardon me?
How long did it take her to adapt that screenplay?
Oh, I don't know. It seems like it was a couple years off and on.
It was a couple of years. There were
Yeah.
7 drafts, significant drafts, and boy, the dialogue and my going through the film during the restoration period, I heard every word of dialogue many, many times, and there were 7 drafts that I know from all of our meetings together. And the wonderful thing was that when we met on our little houseboat, we were just open to ideas and exchanging them. And, you know, what would happen if this happened? And what would he say? And what do you think about this? And so that was really kind of an amazing creative moment of creating this world that we never lived in ourselves. And
but we also, this project was developed through Sundance.
Right.
They saw a draft that Anne had written and invited the 3 of us to the June lab. And at the lab, we worked on the script. And the next draft that Anne wrote after Sundance was the one that started to bring in like American Playhouse. That's what convinced Lindsay Law at American Playhouse that we could get it made, you know, because everybody looked at that story and at what you could raise as an independent filmmaker, and they just didn't see how they came together. So
you mentioned that the film is going to be out on Blu-ray. Can you talk a little bit about the distribution from here of the restoration and where people can see it?
I don't really know. I mean, it's through this, you know, during this coronavirus crisis, where none of us can leave our houses. Kino Lorber has this thing called Kino Marquee, where different theaters like the Rafael can sort of book it and run it the way that they would in their theater, except that no one can go to the theater. And so this week it's at the Rafael, and then next week it's the group that puts on the San Diego Asian Film Festival, Asian American Film Festival, starting on Friday the 10th. Then it will be them, and Kenji and Roz and I will do another Q&A with that. But I still hope that there was supposed to be an opening at the Brooklyn Academy of Music Friday, April 10th. And they are still committed to opening it. So I'm still hoping that there will be more theatrical screenings as well, because it looks stunning on the big screen. Oh, yeah.
Beautiful.
In regards to the Blu-ray, yes, there will be Blu-rays and DVDs with a booklet that goes with it that Andy wrote some wonderful dialogue about how the film was put together and her participation in the film. And there will be a director's commentary, director and producer editor commentary that goes along with it. So it has all these nice extras, and it's meant to be like collector items for film connoisseurs. So that is definitely a plan of Kino Lorber, but they will also offer a streaming service themselves, which is the modern thing to do, is to not only get into movie theaters, not only have a collectible, but to also have it streamed so that it's always available in all forms.
Well, it'll definitely still be on the Rafael at Home site for people to watch or tell others to watch
Oh,
Yes.
for another week. Yeah, it just started on Friday. It's there through this week, potentially longer, I think, if
Okay.
continue to watch. So it should be at least.
That's great.
Yeah. So I encourage you to do that. There's obviously also other films on Rafael at Home. If you guys want to check those out, there's plenty of
Right.
stuff.
We have
Yes,
already.
we've been doing that. We've seen some good ones.
Yeah, I know, it's great. There's still plenty. I can't even keep up, even though I'm supposedly have all this free time.
So I remember the question I was going to ask you, Rosalind. Is it okay to?
Of course.
Do you remember the contest, the way that we were always waiting on wardrobe? Usually you're waiting on lighting when you're in production, and it was because of the corsets. Do you remember this? It was
Yes.
taking a really long time to get you guys all into your corsets.
Yeah.
Eric, the first assistant director who is in charge of keeping us, moving forward, he was built like this, and he,
Eric.
yes, Eric, they had a contest at lunch one day to see whether they could get him into
A corset in 30 seconds.
and really, whatever you guys all learned about in that contest, all of a sudden, those corsets were going on and you were flying out the door.
Yeah. He sort of redirected the whole process.
Yes.
It was actually, the whole process was the reason why, if anybody wants to know what a great experience it was to work with you guys, just have them call me. It's the reason I love to do independent films, is that was my first experience, and I've never been in something where everyone just loved you guys so much. And it was like, honestly, it was like Nancy was like a mom. There were times where she'd be very firm, like, Roz, we have to do it this way. No, that's nice, but doesn't work. She was firm, and yet she was like a really great parent. That's the only way I can think of describing it. And we all felt the same way. We all felt we wanted them to have their baby. We wanted them to have the best baby.
Well, we sure did.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for taking the time and for making this beautiful film, and to be able to still be able to talk about it 30 years later. It's such a pleasure.
Totally fun. Fun to see you, Joanne. Fun to
Thank
see
you
you.
for
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.